esto, que es Alone in the Dark.
Memory. It was during a conversation with G that one first heard of the New England.
Ya se lo he leído. Alright. Según el diario, hay una entrada por aquí a las cavernas, ¿no? ¡Ah! Es que es inmortal. Parece que sí. ¡Ah! Pedazo de tonto. ¿Cuál es la escena de Game Over? Te arrastra un zombie. Oh, Dios. No, ya me voy, ya me voy, ya me voy, ya me voy. ¡No! No, conseguí unas balas. Y un tope de puerta. esto o no? Por fin. Esto no está bien. Pero esto no lo hiere. Y se ríe de mí. Ya me bajó casi toda mi salud. Voy a darle load. No. Son espadas, eso que suena. Me dio bien. ¡Ah, lo vencí! ¿Pero a qué costo? Creo que puedo salir mejor librado. La idea es acorralarlo. Hijo de perra. ¡No! Ok. Ya sé cómo. Terminé como la vez pasada. Ya sé cómo hacerlo. Ahora sí, de la chingada. ¡Ah! creí que ya sabía. Pero no fue así. Puedo hacerlo mejor. Ándele, cabrón. Pero no encontré el garfio. Antes no me daba su garfio también. Solo era la llave. Voy a darle load otra vez para estar seguro de que no se bugueó. Hijo de perra. Te digo que... No puede ser. Ok, si lo arrincono y luego ya le doy ese golpe. Solo me da la llave. Yo pensé... ¿Por qué tenía en la mente que me daba también su garfio? ¡Atrás, bellaco! Oh, así es como se hace. un encendedor y tengo cerillos. Ok, esto no creo que lo use más.
Daemonia Particularis, Signs and Rituals, by Heinrich Cassel, Ring Publications.
The ritual of invocation demands that the officiant be pure. We have already described the complex operations to be followed in order to call those that sleep in superior dimensions. We shall, for the present, limit ourselves to the sign of mutual recognition used amongst their number by adepts of the cult of the Old Ones. The sign also serves as protection when in the presence of a servant of evil. The sign resembles a blessing, save that the first and little fingers are both folded beneath the thumb, whilst the second and third fingers are held up. It would appear that this sign has no effect on adepts of a certain rank with knowledge of particular secrets contained in the corpus demonicus. The use of such signs is not without considerable risk to the user during any attempt to call upon those from without.
Pedo con este libro, güey. Da algunas instrucciones para realizar rituales. No les gusta esta música, dice. Quizá con la llave también puedo abrir aquí. Esto lleva al jardín de nuevo. ¿Qué pasa si yo le disparo primero? Creo que lo maté. ¿Por qué no cambia la cámara? Es un libro falso. Quizá hay un hueco en la biblioteca donde pueden embonar. Pero la biblioteca está posesa. Hay un ente en la biblioteca. Esa madre atraviesa los libreros. Pero es lenta. Tengo que buscar. Aquí se ve como... Si suelto la lámpara para tomar el libro, regresa a la oscuridad. ¿Qué pasa si la dejo en el suelo? Ok. Tengo que encontrar primero, ¿no? ¿Dónde está el hueco? Shit. ¡No!
Fragments of the Book of Abdul.
Abdullah Rashid se refiere al Necronomicon.
In the antique city of dead Relia, Cthulhu dreams and waits. In the pit of time, the unspeakable lies in wait. That is not dead which can eternal lie. Relia, your blocks of stone seal the ritual that gives birth to fear. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! Let he who knows how to invoke the stones act. It is time. Let the shadow of Cthulhu darken the sky. May the servitor of the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs sound his flute in honor of the unspeakable. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! May he who may not be named cast his withering gaze upon the unbeliever, for he is the door, the key, and the guardian of the door, and holds you now in his immense power.
Sospecho que no existe en el universo mayor dicha que la incapacidad de la mente humana para vincular entre sí todo lo que ella contiene. Esta entidad que acecha en la biblioteca debe ser the one who may not be named. ¡Oh! Perdí salud por leer el libro de Abdul. Otro libro.
The Sons of the Sun and of the Shadows. Lieutenant Lope de Vega's account of his astounding travels to the land of the Aztecs.
Lope de Vega jamás estuvo en México, en América. Ah, no, sí, sí estuvo, ¿no? Ah, jamás.
Holy Christ! Cried Captain Cortez, astonished by the strange rite we beheld. We found the savages half naked, They were throwing balls of silver and gold at each other. They laughed as if demented, clearly maddened by some heathen drug. And yet, should one of them fail to catch the ball thrown in his direction, the poor devil was seized and dragged off to be sacrificed in their temple. As we discovered, this frightful game was a ritual most holy to them, and symbolized the movement of the heavenly bodies. The dropping of a ball foretold a catastrophe. That is what the Aztecs believed in their godless ignorance. Their countless deities could only be appeased through endless human sacrifices. The victim's heart, which was still beating, lay in the hand of the murderous priest. The interior of the temple was surprisingly cool. The weight of our armor, our exhaustion, even the burden of our suffering, they were all banished by a sense of awe that the crudely magnificent altar instilled. In the tomb-like silence, a deep voice chanted an incantation. The majestic statue of the water goddess, Chalchihuitlicue, seemed to throb with vitality. This massive stone, draped in a golden cloak and studded with precious stones, was coming to life before our very eyes. Horror of horrors! The granite eyes of the statue, empty of life only moments before, were now injected with blood. We staggered back in amazement. Dom Jose was taken by a fit of convulsions. He tried to raise up his crucifix, as if to ward off an attack by demons. The heathen priest laughed cruelly. The statue's mouth cracked open in a deathly grin, bearing teeth sharpened to dagger points. Captain Cortez cried, "Attack!" But it was no use. We were glued to the spot. First, we were unable to move. Our armor seemed to be bolted to the temple floor. Our legs weakened, and we collapsed in a thunder of steel. Only Cortez had the presence of mind to unsheath his dagger. He hurled it at the cackling priest. 4 inches of the finest Toledo steel buried itself in the heathen's face. His blood spurted, splashing the now lifeless idol. We picked ourselves up with difficulty. Never will I forget that terrible moment. My companions, naturally enough, told tales of devilish enchantments cast upon our armor. Whatever the truth of that, I could not deny that the supreme god of the fourth universe had treated us as mere playthings. I am convinced that a terrible energy is yet contained within that heathen statue. A power strong enough to change a proud conquistador into a helpless puppet. Drawing of Chalchihuitlicue by Dom Jose de la Sierra, done before the destruction of the Aztec temple of Tenochtitlan.
Es la estatua pesada con la que destruí la armadura. Es la pista para destruir la armadura. Ahí viene el vato que no debe ser nombrado. Ok, aquí está. ¡Oh! Diantres. Si me paro aquí y leo el libro, bueno, todo esto los libros que estaba leyendo, el que encontré en el cuarto del pirata, decía que había que hacer una seña con la mano y estar parado sobre un símbolo como este para estar protegido. Entonces, si leo otra vez el Necronomicon aquí, ¿sucederá algo?
Ludwig Prien, De vermis mysteriis. Nomine invocatoris, si non sanctificatus es, cave. De vermis mysteriis non absolvo folem legendum fatum et eum versus. Tibi magnum innominandum signa stellarum nigrarum et
Es un conjuro de vermis mysteris. ¿Qué libros debo cargar y cuáles no? No puedo cargar todo.
Juan Luis Jorge, De Bibliotheca. Reflections on the power of the verb in certain texts. Archaeos Publications, 1919, Stafford.
Será un guiño a Jorge Luis Borges. Y bueno, su texto de la Biblioteca de Babel.
Translation does not alter the occult power contained within such forbidden texts. The malevolent energy is in no way diminished. The spell must be cast aloud and clearly, in certain languages or little-known dialects. Maglafach Fathang. The reader will understand that, in the light of these revelations, I would be foolhardy to continue quoting from the text I have before me. If spoken aloud in its entirety, it would surely awaken powerful and malignant forces. I will go further and say that simple reading of some of the more technical passages describing specific practices is in itself a perilous exercise. The ill-prepared reader can easily fall prey to attacks of demented hysteria, not unlike those described in cases of individuals said to be possessed by evil spirits. I recommend the study made by Zempf, Urbain, Grandier, and Loudon, and the reports made by the Reverend Richard Price concerning a number of astonishing, to say the least, exorcisms carried out in a parish near Providence. Given what I have written, we must be grateful to the librarians of the British Museum, who have never allowed consultation of the work of Al-Azif's startling work, the infamous Necronomicon. Copies of that work do exist, in spite of the zeal of book-burning inquisitors. For proof, we need look no further than the British Museum, of course, and the sealed archives of the Miskatonic University in Arkham. Other examples of books whose evil can be unleashed by any thoughtless reader are von Jutz's von Unersprechlichen Kulten and the abominable De Vermis Mysteries by Ludwig Prien, whose sordid death should be a lesson to all those tempted by a study of the occult.
Sí, pero ¿qué hace? Reflexiones sobre el poder del verbo. Parchment.
The Sacrificial Dagger, Otto Stern, Lumina Books.
The importance placed on ritual sacrifice is constant in religious cult practice. Propitiating the gods is a theme common to many religions. The Old Testament affords many examples. Primitive polytheistic belief systems integrate sacrifice in their rituals as part of the recurrent process of reaffirmation and, naturally enough, group cohesion. The members of their social and religious community come together in an act of purification and atonement. It would be erroneous to imagine the act of human sacrifice linking priest, offering, and God, C.F. Manzetti, stone cults, as anything less than a vital focusing of the group's faith. The act also ensures the continuing appeasement of the god, but only if practiced by a recognized officiating priest using the appropriate instrument. Studies made concerning primitive religious groups bear witness to the central role of sacrifice in living ritual. My own work in the field of ethnopsychology brought me into contact with a sorcerer living in the region of Arkham. He introduced me to the rite of steel, linked to a ceremony known as adoring the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs. The god being adored is known as the vagabond. Here, the dagger's role, which allows the life breath to pass from one dimension to another, is essential. The vagabond is a frightening figure, being able to move where he wants and to kill those who have displeased the goat god, for whom he acts as a go-between. The goat is clearly a fertility god. The priest, having spoken the invocation, must choose the appropriate dagger for the sacrifice. The knife with a sinusoidal blade that must be dipped 7 times, on night when the moon is full, in water that has been distilled 100 times, will be laid aside, since it would send the vagabond back into his own dimension. See illustration.
El vagabundo es el que acecha en la biblioteca y con esta daga, el cuchillo con la hoja sinusoidal, debe ser sumergido 7 veces en noches cuando la luna esté llena en agua que ha sido destilada 100 veces.
The priest will rather choose the dagger with a curved blade. That is more appropriate for slitting of the lamb's throat. This act transfigures the sorcerer priest and plunges the assembled worshippers into a divine trance.
Esta es una daga de sacrificio. Esta es para el vagabundo, es la de
The
sacrificio.
priest will rather choose.
The Book of Yael, Signs of Stone, Eucharistic Rituals of Forbidden Cults. Texts collated by Monsignor Vacher, legate in the Curia of the Vatican.
Numerous devilish cults speak of monstrous creatures called the Old Ones. These supernatural beings are believed to be possessed of powers equivalent to those of the gods of antique religions. Adepts of such cults refer to forbidden literature in order to cause these frightful entities to appear before them. What serious student of folk myths has not come across the names of Cthulhu and Shub-Niggurath? It must be said that these creatures wield tremendous power and are difficult to control once they have been unleashed into the world. Those who serve He who goes in shadows protect themselves with signs of stone, carved into the walls of houses or engraved on various objects. For those misguided servants of evil, the best protection appears to be that afforded by the sign of the most ancient gods, engraved in Manar stone, a heavy material said to be disagreeable to the touch. The sinful practices of those who fall into such errors can only lead to the darkest of despair, and are a mortal danger to the soul. Such monsters as those invoked by these foolhardy individuals are engendered when reason drops its guard. Man is easily tempted into perversion. It is why we must forever remain alert and renounce Satan with each breath we take. His ways are infinite in number.
Ok. ¿Dónde estás, cabrón?
Unfinished chapter of Terra Incognita by Jacob van Ostade. A hitherto unpublished fragment of the manuscript unearthed following indications furnished in the Vatican Library's Expurgatory Index.
In those icy and unwelcoming lands, the rites of wizards and healers are deeply rooted in ancient legend. Mysterious and cruel beings are thought to have ruled over the Arctic plains in times past. A cursed city, enclosed by massive walls, is believed to stand to this day. It contains fabulous treasures, and is inhabited by the degenerate descendants of those who instilled centuries of terror in the hearts of the people. These people, naturally placid, are seized with rage and horror at the very mention of the prisoners of the ice. Were these dreadful captives to be freed from their frozen cells, they would reap a horrifying tribute of human flesh. These blood-curdling beings may be invoked by certain ritual words. They can even be controlled, albeit with the greatest of difficulty. I admit to being impressed by these tales, repeated to me on many occasions and in a number of different places during my travels in the region. I have also seen troubling cult objects, sculpted in a material unknown to me. Another remarkable fact
is that local Eskimos experience great distaste in pronouncing certain words, and invariably avoid saying them. Here is a living example of the power that words contain. As it is said in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word.
If Rocks Could Talk, or The Story of a Louisiana Plantation, by the Marquise de Chamfray.
After the criminal selling off of Florida by the foul usurper, my father elected to remain in this inhospitable land, where we were free at least to express our royalist feelings, and hope our country would come to its senses. In 1818, a certain Pickford bought up Ledoux's land, after the poor fellow had ruined himself in unfortunate speculation. Pickford soon turned out to be the most loathsome human we had ever encountered. He was an adventurer of the worst kind, nouveau riche, and bloated with a grotesque sense of self-importance. First came the incessant army of men with shovels, digging into the mountain of earth that was to fill in the surrounding swamp. The undertaking was quite stupendous. We learned from a slave that the final objective was to connect the existing caves with another one of gigantic proportions. Racked by a mania of persecution, Elia Pickford constantly fired his workers and hired new ones. He did all he could to keep anyone from learning about his plans. My father was amused and said, "The poor fool will end up getting lost in his own cave." The walls went up, and tongues started wagging. Our detestable neighbor had been a sailor, a ruffian grown rich on questionable trade. Distasteful stories were told of him.
¿Es un mapa de la caverna?
When the work was finished, Pickford invited us to the opening of his rambling mansion, which he named Derceto.
Es Derceto.
My father asked what the strange name meant. Pickford answered, "Derceto reminds me of Astarte, the fertility goddess. Around here, the name is Shub-Niggurath. I believe that a name so steeped in evil should be said aloud came as not such a shock to my father, as he himself confided in me some while later.
Ok, sí, es el mapa, es el plano de la primera planta, me parece.
When we left immediately. When the work was finished, Pickford invited us to the opening of his rambling mansion, which he named Derceto. We left immediately.
In June of 1862,
Derceto was burned down in unexplained circumstances. It was undoubtedly the deed of some jealous Yankee or another. It was amazing to watch the servants rushing into the flames to try and save their bullet-riddled master. After that terrible night, Derceto fell into ruin. Its blackened walls were soon overgrown, as human-built works always are, by ever-present nature. In 1875, the property was eventually bought by a gentleman whose name was Howard Artwood. I was sorry that my father, who delighted in fine conversation, was no longer alive to enjoy the company of this new neighbor. Learned and well-versed in history, he had made a particular study of piracy. It was Artwood who told me that Pickford had commanded a ship that flew the flag of piracy. That explained the scoundrel's great wealth. Artwood was fascinated by Pickford and undertook a great deal of research in an attempt to find some treasures that he was convinced the pirate had hidden. He went through the ruins inch by inch. He then had the burnt-out house rebuilt exactly as it had been, and refurbished the library that had miraculously escaped the flames on the night of the Great Fire. Artwood set about studying every volume in that library, and often talked to me of his research. He was a handsome widower, deeply attached to his son Jeremy, who was later to become a professional artist. Artwood worked incessantly, first from the room I offered him, then from his own freshly restored home, which he rebaptized Derceto. I imagine he hoped to enlist the help of the god of good fortune in his treasure hunt. As far as I have ever been able to tell, all his searching came to nothing. There were no lost treasure to be found at Derceto. I learned of Artwood's death while I was in Paris. But that, as they say, is another story.
La mansión fue construida por un pirata que se hacía pasar por un aventurero. Entonces en los túneles, después Harwood la compró eh, porque se incendió y se perdió todo. Harwood la compró y la restauró y en muchos sentidos parece que la compró para buscar, porque era un estudioso de la piratería, para buscar el tesoro del otro vato que la había hecho.
If
After the criminal selling off of Florida by... It was an adventure. After the
Pickford.
criminals...
Pickford era el nombre del pirata. Voy a pararme aquí otra vez.
May he who
Esta vez no me pasó nada. Si lo hago de nuevo, pero fuera del...
may
Ándale. Puedo enloquecer por leerlo fuera y pierdo vida, 5. Pero entonces, ¿qué pasa si leo de Vermis Mysteris?
Nomine invoca.
Es la muerte inmediata. Qué interesante. Qué buen juego, cabrón.
In May.
¿Qué debo hacer ahora?
The sun
Only as the never drawing of
sé qué hacer.
Daemonia Particularis, Signs and Rituals, by Heinrich Cassel, Ring Publications.
The ritual of invocation demands that the officiant be pure. We have already described the complex operations to be followed in order to call those that sleep in superior dimensions.
Habré pasado algo por alto. Quizá una de las llaves que tiré pero ¿dónde la tiré? La llave del vestidor no creo que sea. The chest key. No creo que sea. ¿Qué pedo? ¡Oh! No sé dónde tiré las otras llaves. Tengo que ver el video anterior.
The trial of Captain Preggst, as reported by his faithful companion Elisha Smith, known amongst his fraternity by the awful name of Captain Ellie Hell. Transcribed from the log found aboard the wreck of the frigate Astarte by H. Hartwood.
"By all the devils!" roared Pregged, glaring at William, the judge. "Curse it, Will! It'll take much more than every cannon in the blasted navy to make me change me mind. You're the greatest blackguard that ever joined our fraternity. Am I not Pregged, captain of the Astarte, and bloodiest villain in all the 7 seas? Bloody Ezek, they call me. And you think I'll tell you where I hid my treasure?" The tribunal of the Corsairs' fraternity murmured at this. Pregged was indeed all he claimed. The judge, One-Eyed William, slammed his fist on the table, and silence was restored. "Shut your mouth, Pregged! You didn't pay the fraternity its rightful share, and that means only one thing. You'll hang by the neck from a yardarm, you scurvy cur!
Scurvy cur.
Here's the rope twisted by Satan himself. You threaten me, Will? Many a man better than yourself has lived to regret holding a cutlass in my face. You'll be begging for mercy, mark my words." That shook One-Eyed William, and no mistake. Danny waved his hook in the air and shouted, "Prext was always a loudmouth. The law says we hang him." The jurors took up the cry, "Hang him!" It was Pregg's turn to slam his fist on the table. He threw back his head and roared with laughter. "You fools! You want to kill what will never die? Try it!" Once more, the assembled Corsairs murmured. There was unease in the air. They remembered what happened to Chuck, the gizzard slitter, the man who opened his mouth once too often. It was night, and a bitter wind whipped the New England coast. Snug inside the Dead Horse Inn, one of the Astarte's men was talking. His name was Chuck, and his subject was black magic. He told stories of human sacrifices, voodoo rites, and zombies. He told a tale of a time when their luck was down and they were holed up in a Florida swamp. Pregged went missing. When he returned, he shouted, "'Tis the devil that guides us now, me hearties!" Whether that was true or not, the Astarte began taking loot after juicy loot. The favorite song of the Astarte's men, "Crash the Bones," was replaced by a new one. "A skull, go to port, Sabre, to starboard. Pass over that will, and with death you'll deal. If you cut a rope, cut the right, I hope, or then, I don't mind, the death you will find." The next day, as you may have guessed, Chuck's body was found with a dagger plunged between his shoulder blades. Chuck's face was fixed in a ghastly grin. Molten lead had been poured down his throat. Whatever way things happened next, and I don't have the details, Prext was with us again, and we set sail for Florida. We anchored the frigate not far from New Orleans. Taking a few trusted companions with him, Prext set off into the swamp. They carried large wooden chests with them. 2 days later, we heard shots being fired and screams. Pregged arrived soon after that and claimed they'd been attacked by alligators. He alone managed to escape with his life. He went on to say that the time had come to share out the spoils of our many loots. I was given command of the Astarte, while Prext handed 3 chests over to the crew. The chests were full of gold and precious gemstones. The rum flowed that night, and the stars shone bright. All at once I noticed a tall man dressed in black. Pregged introduced him to me. "Here's a hearty mate. You can call him Keith. Many a tale he could tell." Pregged laughed loudly and held up a roll of parchment. "And his hideout, none better." The parchment fell to the ground, partly unrolling. I noticed what seemed to be a map of underground tunnels, a veritable maze of caverns. Pregged continued, "I'm giving up the pirate's life. The Astarte is in your hands now, my lad. She's a fine ship, and my reputation goes with her. Should any man call me coward, then break his head for me. I'm leaving you only because I found a treasure more precious than the purest of gold." Keith spoke to him then. "It is midnight. They are ready, and we must go." The stranger turned his cold eyes on me and said in a soft, chilling voice, "Sometimes Pregged talks too much. Forget what he just said, and maybe you'll live." The fellow's words froze the marrow in my bones, and it was all I could do to mumble, "I'll not breathe a word." The canoe slid away into the night. Their torches disappeared in the distance of the swamp. My snoring companions didn't hear the insidious rhythm of far-off drums.
Este reloj. Cualquier otro lado me dice no hay nada importante, pero en el reloj no. ¿Por qué?
The Creatures of Night by Hubertus the Bald, translated from Latin by his brother in prayer, Fratre Johann Marcus.
Of monstrosity. You who read me know that night engenders monsters, and that night creatures exist. The accursed book of Abdul al-Hazred is clear on this matter. That is not dead which can eternal lie. Unhappy he who knows that book. Unhappy he whose eyes alight upon that foulest of texts. Unhappy he who implores the standing stones, for he will free the powers of darkness. Of the pit. Stagnant waters are like the memory of men. Beneath the surface calm, clawed beasts await, and are known to initiates as the deep ones. Awaiting his prey, the deep one seizes him and drags him down. Unhappy he whose Awaiting his prey, the deep one seizes him and drags him down to the abyss, where Dagon, the cruel god, swims and reveres him whose name may not be pronounced. Of libraries. Unhappy he who frees the prowler. Unhappy he who meets the prowler erring among the books. He generates the vagabond that comes from other spheres. He believes the vagabond does not exist. He will feel the embrace of death, for in the eyes of the vagabond, books are no more than dreams, stone no more than wind. The vagabond knows how to take the breath of the reckless. Of strife. He who speaks does not know, and believes he is able to kill the creatures of the night. Folly. Evil is conjured up by science and secrecy. He who prowls among books will perish by the blade. He who flies in the dark caverns will scream in fear. He who swims in the depths will evaporate. But he who believes he knows, knows nothing. He who knows says nothing. Of death. There are domains more terrible than death. That is not dead which can eternal lie. Each creature is conjured up and is not dead, but returns to the origins. A monster, a science. Steel kills the vagabond who never dies. Translator's note. Here ends the manuscript of Hubertus, who died in the library of the convent of Teruel in the year of our Lord 1666. Requiescat in pace.
Requiescat in peace. Esa es la llave.
The tale of Captain J.W. Norton of the Army of the Union.
1862. The South was in collapse. Louisiana was open to us. I had each day to requisition victuals for our troops, and was aided in this endeavor by a score of brave men. Rebels were not yet ready to lay down their arms. The region was far from safe. I headed further and further west, and questioned many freed slaves. From them, I learned of a plantation on the coast. Its name was Derceto. We received a less than hearty welcome. Only Pickford, the owner, behaved in a friendly manner. While my men counted cattle and grain reserves, I learned what I could from him. Man was most unusual and possessed an extraordinarily cultured mind. At nightfall, I gave orders for the men to bivouac at Derceto. Pickford invited my second-in-command, Lieutenant Patterson, and myself to dine. And our host proved a most entertaining conversationalist. While coffee was being served, Patterson went to inspect the men's camp. The cigar Pickford offered me was so acrid that my head began to spin. I remembered campfire tales of fellow officers trapped by devilish Confederate tricks. My mind floated in a foul and dense fog, from which emerged the enlarged and deformed face of Pickford. He grinned at me. Patterson's return chased off the nightmare. I heard shouts and firing from outside, and found the strength to take out my revolver. I fired 3 shots. Pickford fell to the floor. Patterson then helped me out of the burning house. The air was filled with smoke. We resembled a company in disorderly retreat. I saw slaves leaping into the flames of that inferno. They were trying to save Pickford's life.
Así fue como se incendió Derceto. ¿Qué? ¿Se arruinó el juego? Sí. ¡Eso! Bueno, aquí voy a parar ya. Luego seguimos con más Alone in the Dark. Buenos juegos, buenos tiempos.